This episode of GT the Podcast is supported by Alcon.
This is Ike Ahmed.
And I'm Arsham Shaybani.
And we want to welcome you to GT the Podcast.
We're bringing this to you together with BMC and Glaucoma Today,
to offer audible insights into current topics in glaucoma care.
Presented by the authors of our latest, most read GT articles.
Check it out.
Welcome to another episode of Survey Says with Dr. Paul Singh. On this special edition of GT the Podcast, Dr. Singh presents a real patient case from his practice and asks his guests to share how they would manage it. Today's episode features Drs. Jella An and John Berdal. The case in question involves a patient with moderate pseudoexfoliation and a history of bilateral cataract surgery and trabeculectomy. The patient is on a prostaglandin analog but has poor tolerance of topical medications because of preservatives and exacerbation of dry eye. The patient's IOP has been fluctuating, and disease progression is evident on OCT imaging and visual field testing. The guests share their initial reactions to this case, discuss what they would do next, and what their target IOP would be for the patient. The group also touches on some bigger topics related to glaucoma treatment, such as how to begin a discussion with a new patient about their treatment journey, how to decide what's next when a treatment fails, and how to identify poor medication compliance. Later, the guests find out how their colleagues would approach the case based on results of a poll of GT's audience conducted on social media. Tune in to Survey Says with Dr. Paul Singh.
All right, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are. This is Paul Singh here. I am so honored and privileged to be with two really awesome people, my good friends, talking about Survey Says and some glaucoma cases. We have John Berdal and Jella An. How you guys doing?
Great. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having us, Paul.
Oh man, you kidding me? This is stuff I live for, man. Honestly, because I'm up in Wisconsin. I tell you, being in private practice as a glaucoma specialist solo, it's so easy to kind of like get in your own little world where you're like, I don't know, your blinders are on. You're like, I'm the best doctor. I'm doing everything the best and everything's great. And then you realize, wow, there's so many other ways of doing things. And so for me, this is my outlet to learn from everybody else and share thoughts and ideas. And you guys are so awesome to learn from. So excited to talk about a case today that is a real case. These are all real cases. So everybody, the idea of this whole podcast is basically talk about a real case and see what we would do in this panel, but then also could kind of look at what the audience, we've surveyed Instagram and LinkedIn, and we said, ask these questions to the patient or to the audience. We wanted to see kind of where everyone's out there is at and how they would approach glaucoma. Because the thing nowadays, guys, as you all know, there's no right or wrong answer. And we have so many options and tools in our tool belt at different stages of glaucoma that you just never know what anyone's going to do. And it's curious to see how we would treat a patient. So I'm going to get right to it and then get your thoughts on the case and just kind of have some fun. Let's see where it goes. Cool?
Great.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to refresh everybody's memory so everybody knows what the case is all about, and then we'll kind of get some questions from you guys. So, all right. So the idea is a 74-year-old lady who is just one of my patients who had a phaco trab about 10 years ago. She had moderate pseudoexfoliation glaucoma and moderate glaucoma, I think 7 or 8, I can't remember her decibel, but she had no central loss. Very intolerant to medication. So that's why we did a phaco trab at the time. And so we went ahead and did that. Her pressures did fine. She was in the middle to lower to middle teens after her trab for many years. Over the last few years, her pressure has been climbing up. She's back on a PGA. Her pressure in the right eye is around low 20s, 23, 24 range, and her left eye is in the upper teens or so. But she has some fluctuating IOPs. Compliance with topical PGA is not very good. And so she had about 0.7 cups, and her nerve fiber layer is definitely getting worse, and her GCC is almost wiped out, actually, even though her fields aren't too bad yet. So progressing fields, progressing OCTs, uncontrolled glaucoma on a PGA, history of a phaco trab. The trab has failed. It was a superior nasal trab, so she has some superior temporal conj still available. So guys, a couple of things I want to ask you. When you have a patient like this, what's going through your mind in general? I mean, you want to keep it open-minded here. So you have this patient not tolerating medications, has a little bit of some dry eye. What are your thoughts? Jella, I'll start with you since you're nodding.
Yeah, I guess I would like to learn more about her adherence. Is a fluctuation biologic, or is it due to her not using the latanoprost consistently? is the pressure that you get in the office, 23 and 17, is that one of the best pressure, or is it, is it the average pressure? Of course, doing the home eye care and asking her to measure her IOP at home several times a day, that would really give us a good idea. Although just implementing that protocol will increase the adherence. But I think that will be my biggest question. And I guess the second thing that we'll think about would be, what would be our target pressure? So I don't know if you want to discuss that now.
Yeah. So let's do that. Let's do that. So a couple of things. I want to answer the question about the IOP fluctuation. And I want to get your thoughts on target. So she didn't have I didn't do a whole eye care home, to be fair, but we did do a diurnal curve. Sometimes I'll have patients come in throughout the day. I have used eye care home, but not for this patient. But she didn't fluctuate much in the office. So I think the idea for her fluctuation is probably her lack of compliance, which she admitted to. So if a patient ever admits to you that they're poor compliance, that's not a good sign, right? If they actually admit it. So I think as part of its compliance issues as well with her fluctuation. But let's talk. I'll have you start, and then I'll have John get his thoughts on where do you think the target pressure would be in this patient if we think compliance is an issue.
If the compliance is an issue, then target pressure is not that low, right? And so that's actually a good sign for our interventional glaucoma choices. So if you have moderate amount of visual field loss, pseudo exfoliation, and visual field is progressing on those fluctuation IOP, I'm going to assume if it's a compliance issue, I'm going to assume that it's mostly in at least a low 20s most of the times. Then target IOP is probably in the mid-teens, preferably off all medications. And for someone who's intolerant to preservatives, it's just a matter of time that you get intolerance to multiple medications because of the cross reactions. And it could also be because she's not able to use it properly. So I would say mid-teens for both eyes, maybe a little bit lower for the right eye if the right eye was more severe.
Yeah, so luckily her fields look pretty even between the two eyes. A little bit worse in the right, but not too much worse. But definitely had some more GCC loss and RNFL loss in the right eye. So no doubt she had some worse glaucoma in the right eye. John, what are your thoughts, my friend? Just a quick overview, and we'll ask some specific questions.
Oh, there's so much. Let me start by disagreeing with you, Paul. I think that there are wrong answers. There may not be right answers in glaucoma a lot of times, but I think that there are wrong answers. And in this case, one of the wrong answers is to not do anything, is to
Okay,
do nothing.
give you that. I'll give you that.
Um, and and then I always think of a pseudo exfoliation patient as fluctuating no matter what. And so prone to fluctuations. The non-compliance is an issue, but so knowing that she isn't doing well with her drops is helpful to us in the sense that we can, if we know that the prostaglandin is lowering her eye pressure, we've got two options for prostaglandins that don't have compliance issues with Durista and with iDose. So if we had a history of doing of it lowering the pressure, I like an approach like that early on for her. As far as what the target pressure needs to be, did you say what her max pressure was?
Yeah, she was in the low 30s in max, but it would spike. To your point about, I'm glad you brought that up, 'cause I was going to bring it up. Pseudo exfoliation, man, you just never know. I mean, it can be anywhere, and it had spiked up in the low 30s, but sometimes it would come down in the middle to lower 20s T max. So it just depended on the day with
Yeah,
her.
and then to go to your first question is like, what do you start thinking about in a patient like this? The first thing that when I'm my best doctor, I say, what would I want if this was my eye? And really zoom out all the way to that. And that helps me start to contextualize what I want. And that's consistent with the philosophy of let's take a measured, unless we're forced into an urgent situation, let's take a measured approach to this and do the safest, most convenient, most tolerable things for the patient first. And then if those don't protect us or protect her, then let's escalate the care. The other thing that I think about in pseudoexfoliation patients is stability of the anterior chamber. So she had cataract surgery a while ago, and if I'm going to do something that causes big pressure differentials, then I may not do that in pseudoexfoliation first unless I'm really forced into it. And then the last thing that I'll say is just on pseudoex, paying really careful attention to if there's any phacodenesis. Because if there's phacokinesis, that's causing pressure spikes for sure. And it's kicking off pseudoexfoliative debris, and it's rubbing on the back of the iris. And now we're talking about real surgery, and taking that lens out and trying to fixate it in a way. If that's the fundamental problem, we're chasing our tail with everything else we're doing.
Great points. Let's dissect all those things. First of all, luckily there was no obvious phacokinesis. Lens seemed pretty stable in the bag, and so thankfully there was no issues there that I could tell. At least no TIDs, nothing else that would suggest that she was moving chamber, the anterior chamber, and the iris lens diaphragm complex seemed pretty stable. So thankfully, but that's a really good point, John. But actually, you met some good points. I want to talk to both of you guys, and Jill, I want to get your thoughts on this too. So when we talk about glaucoma in general, one of the things that I think a lot of our colleagues out there get concerned about or frustrated with, I think, is all the options, and then what if something fails? What do I do next? And this idea that we don't have any one procedure, one technology is going to last forever, is going to work forever for a lot of these patients. So how do you have that discussion with patients when you see a patient, let's say for the first time coming in, let's say mild glaucoma, right? And they're, let's say, young, for 50, 60, something like that. Are you having a discussion about the journey that you're having with these patients, that look, there's going to be multiple different products and technologies that we're going to use, and how do you have that discussion? Because I think that's an important concept now in the context of so many options that we have at our fingertips. So, Jelly, want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I think I agree with John on that. You always think about what would I want for my eyes, but the patient in front of you may not have the same risk tolerance as you do. So I'm very risk averse. So I always want the stepwise process. From the least invasive to most invasive. Even though the least invasive option is not the most successful option, but still want the least possible, because even if it's like a 20% success rate, I would still want to try that first, because I guess I'm perpetual optimist. But the patient in front of you may be a little bit different. So I would like to see, I would like to try to gauge her risk tolerance. If she prefers not to do a blood forming procedures, then you will start to go down. If she's someone who's as risk averse as I am, then we'll start with probably the laser option, like in-office option first, and then move upwards.
And John, thank you, Jill. And John, how do you have that discussion with the patient about, look, we have a long-term journey here with each other, and I'm going to use different things at my disposal to help you, and kind of how do you manage that expectation that any one procedure may not be enough?
The first thing that I do is categorize the glaucoma in my mind. Is this the glaucoma that's going to get them, or could get them, or is this not? Is this forgive the phrase, but is this gentleman's glaucoma, or is this real glaucoma? And if it's glaucoma that I know I'm going to control, the first thing that I say to the patient is, I'm not going to let you go blind. You're going to live a fully sighted life. It's just a matter of how much we have to do, how inconvenient it is. If it's real glaucoma, and this is kind of on that borderline, I say, hey, I need you. Together, we have a great chance of making you see all of your life. What I need from you is to show up from your appointments, do what I ask you to do, but most importantly, if I ask you to do something and it isn't working for you, don't hide it. Tell me. We'll find something different that you can do. But and I have more patients come back and tell me, I remember the moment you pulled your chair up, looked me in the eye, and told me I wasn't going to go blind. And that's 8 years after we had that conversation. So I start there, and I think that establishes the most important thing between the doctor and the patient, which is trust. And then they don't really care about all of these details of what could come in the future. They just know that we've got tools at our toolkit, and we can escalate them as needed. So I do talk about the journey in that I need you to show up for your appointments. I need to hear how you're doing with your stuff, and you need to do what I ask you to do unless it's not working for you, and then tell me. And that's about the extent of it.
That's great. I think these are both, thank you guys for those comments, because I think that is something that, however we do it, I think establishing that trust, establishing the expectation that, this is a long-term condition that we need to be partners with, I think, together, and that it's not me versus you. And then, for me, it's just establishing that, don't worry, we have a lot of options now. And, we'll try different things at different parts of your disease course, your journey. That's going to help maintain the highest quality life and hopefully protect you from ever losing vision. And we'll try different things, and the safest things first, and we can go from there. But even now we have many other, safe options. And so I think that's a great way to kind of kind of couch it and put into a context. So one more thing too, guys, I want to just, before we get into what we do in this case as well, what do you do and how do you find ways to identify poor compliance? Because we always don't know. This patient's only one med, but let's say someone's on 3 meds. How do you know if someone's fluctuating because of compliance, or like you said, Jella, is it because they're actually fluctuating based upon the disease as well? I'll start with you, John, first, and then I'll go back to Jella. How do you identify poor compliance if they don't tell you?
First thing that I do is recognize that I'm not going to know the truth for sure. No matter what I do, I'm just trying to get a better sense of the truth with compliance. And so make it safe to be honest. Hey, these drops are tough. I'm terrible at taking my Lipitor. I do it like once every 4 days. How are you doing with these eye drops? Do they bug you? Like, really, tell me the truth. Are you getting them in? How often? If they look me in the eye right away and say I never miss, then I believe them. If they say I get them in about half the time, I'll probably cut that in half and say it's about a quarter of the time. Not because they're lying to me, just because, just like surgeons say, hey, I'll be home in 15 minutes, 45 minutes later, we roll in. We're just optimistic, or we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt.
I love it. That is so true, my friend. It's so true. But I like that, creating that safe space, admitting that, look, we know you're missing it. So just be honest with me. It's all good. Don't worry about it. I love that. Jella, what are your thoughts on how you identify and how you have that discussion with patients?
Yeah, I agree with John, and making them feel safe and kind of assuming that they are not using it every day, and making them feel it's okay to do so. Making kind of generalize it, saying like, "Hey, I miss my drops. I miss my medication all the time, and how about you?" And if you make them feel okay and don't feel guilty about sharing that, yeah, they sometimes miss it. I think then you'll be able to, get closer to the truth.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I mean, those are really good points. I think a couple of things I've learned too over the course of my career is that there's other signs that you can look at for noncompliance. For instance, these are simple things, but ocular surface disease to me is a big barrier to compliance. And I think that if someone comes in, they're complaining of fluctuating vision, and their eyes don't say that my eyes are watering when I watch TV after 5 minutes, after blink to clear it up after reading a computer screen. Those are all symptoms of poor arterial film stability. I just think about ocular surface disease, and patients, many different data sets out there show poor compliance when you have ocular surface disease symptoms. So it's one thing I look at. And I think that things like the bottle, if they can't tell you the name or the color of the top, they've been on a drop for 10 years and they're like, I don't really know. I'm like, this is someone who I'm not quite sure. Or they come with a bottle and you can't read the bottle, and like it's all the labels are completely eroded. And it's like, this is like a 10-year-old bottle. You're still using it? So you're absolutely right. There's so many different ways, but I think just identifying compliance. Compliance is a big part of why I think our patients do not only fluctuate, but do progress. In a lot of studies now, I think, are showing that with the LIGHT trial and Horizon and other studies as well.
This episode of GT the Podcast is supported by Alcon.
All right, let's get to this patient and get back to kind of the audience in a second. So we have a target pressure. You were saying, Jella, middle teens around, and hopefully keep it stable. John, are you feeling very similar to that philosophy? Keep that pressure in the middle teens and keep it more stable? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I just don't really know yet. They were pressure of 30. They're fluctuating a bit. I'm not so set on what the target pressure needs to be here. I'm much more interested in the fact that she's progressing, and I want to lower the pressure that I can see, and I'm concerned about the pressure I can't see.
All right, fair enough. So now that you have these contacts and these concepts, what are your thoughts on the next? I'm going to give you the polling questions, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and what you would do next. So we have a lot of options, as you guys mentioned. In the polling questions that I asked the audience, I'd love to have you guys thoughts on is, do we change the PGA? She's on one generic latanoprost right now. Do we do a drug delivery or a different PGA? Do we do, let's say, an SLT? She did not have SLT in the past. I'm a big fan of primary SLT, but SLT, or let's say micropulse, or maybe some other laser, like even micropulse, or even CPC, slow burn potentially. MIGS, going back in the conventional pathway and do some MIGS procedure, conventional MIGS, or another subconj surgery, another Zen or some other subconj. Any thoughts on those options and what you would do next? I know you mentioned a little bit about drug delivery, John. Is that something you would do next that you're mentioning earlier?
I actually think all those options are reasonable except for additional subconj surgery right now. And so if it was my eye, I probably would do SLT, but I have a low, that 20% or less thought that it would work, but boom, we did it today. Let's see you back in 6 to 8 weeks and see if that made a difference is probably my first move. But there's 3 horses looking to win this race on the first move for me, and it'd be Meg's drug delivery and SLT. And I think I'm going to do SLT, and I don't think it's going to work.
Although some exfoliation, you never know. They do tend to do well with SLT. You never know, right? But so I think they're the safe options or easy options, and I think to your point, this is not an emergency situation. This patient hasn't progressed in like a month and hasn't like gone spiking up to 50. So if it doesn't work, we have other options too. So thanks for that. What about you?
If I'm doing SLT, I tell them that this is going to be really safe. It's probably not going to work, but it gives both of us the confidence that we tried the absolute safest thing first.
Very good point. Jella, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, John, I absolutely agree with you on the SLT assessment. I see the SLT is actually one of the most popular option here, and probably that's what I'm going to try first, just because it's the least invasive and safest and easiest to arrange, and there's really little downside other than lost time if you think it's not going to work. But I would make sure that patient understand that there's probably less than 50% chance of achieving target IOP with SLT and get off the latanoprost that she's sometimes using. So it's a good idea to have the plan B ready. But I respectfully disagree with you about not, filtering surgery not being any option. Even though I'm a risk averse, I think in this case, it may be a necessary step. I will still do the SLT first to make sure that we've tried everything. But between another, like a standalone angle surgery versus another filtering surgery, there's not really a right or wrong answer here, I think. I would actually examine her bleb and see the morphology and the location and status of the ostium and the flap to see if the bleb revision is a possibility. I think that may be a best bet at getting off her all medication and get to the low to mid-teens target IOP. And you can try this on a slit lamp, and it's a relatively safe and easy to do. And if you're doing it in the OR, I will always have a Zen gel stent as a standby, just in case you can't reestablish the flow. We'll ensure that there's at least a couple clock hours of a mobile conjunctiva, either supranasal or supratemporal, although I prefer supranasal, but if the trap is really supranasal, then you may have to do the supratemporal. But I think that would really give us the best success rate.
Yeah, it's really good points from both of you. I mean, I think Jelly, your point taken about reestablishing flow in a trab or a Zen. For me, I have low threshold to just go ahead and kneeling a Zen and trying to improvise. It's pretty straightforward and it can work a lot of times. And unfortunately, this conj is pretty flat and scarred and superior nasally where trab was. So I didn't feel like a kneeling would help because sometimes yes, you have a little larger cystic bleb or you have some mobile conj around it. We can kind of do some needling and revise it. But I really felt this was pretty flattened out that I didn't think it'd have enough oomph to help out, and maybe more risk of a little thinner conch too, the risk of some perforation and leak. So I said, let's hold off on that. But really good point. I agree with you on that. In terms of SLT, we're going to get to that in a second. What is your thoughts on kind of primary SLT? And real quick for that, just a couple minutes, how do you have that discussion with patients? Do you have any way to describe it to patients that makes you feel like patients are more willing to adopt it? Because I know there's a lot of doctors say, well, I like SLT, but patients don't want to have laser first and they want to do drops first. Any thoughts on how you address that issue? Jella, I'll start with you first.
Yeah, I just give them a laser option. If it's someone that I'm diagnosing for the first time, and then we've established that we're going to treat it, I just tell them we usually start with the laser therapy. It's just a cold light laser. You're not going to feel anything. It can be done within a minute for both eyes. And if it doesn't work all the time, but I would say 80% success rate. If that is the case, then you don't have to worry about the drops. If it doesn't work, you can always start the drops after.
John, what are your thoughts on that? How you have that discussion with the patient?
Yeah, I'm not too paternalistic by nature, but I am a little bit as a doctor. I want to get to know the patient. But if I go to an orthopedic surgeon, I don't want them to give me the choice of 6 different things to do. I want them to tell me I'm there because they're the expert. And I want them to guide me to the right procedure. while taking into account my things, how I actually think about it is, if the patient had everything in their head that I have in my head, which is impossible, what would they choose? And then how do I get them there? And so the conversation I have is, hey, look, you've got mild to moderate glaucoma. This is not going to make you go blind. The previous conversation, as long as you do X, Y, and Z, the previous conversation we had, the first step here would be a laser treatment to lower your pressure. It's safe, it's straightforward, and if it doesn't get us there, we've got good next steps. And that's the extent of the conversation. I wait for them to ask me how it works and what we're doing exactly, because I don't think that most patients want to know. Nurses, engineers, they do.
Yeah, no, I think these are great points. I think that for me, to your point, John, about being paternalistic, I am a little bit more now bullish about giving my recommendation now for these things, because I just realize it's so confusing for patients. And to your point, they don't know what's right or wrong. They're coming to us for our true opinion. And I think we have data now. And I think the data, we've always had data on SLT, but with the light trial now, they just solidified all the other previous historical data sets that show us it is a, to me and personally, and with data, a better option than first line drops for long term. And so I just tell a patient, this is a beam of light that rejuvenates. That's my terminology. I say, look, and it really is. I say, this is a beam of light that doesn't hurt. It's covered by insurance, takes a couple minutes in the office. And all I'm doing is letting your body heal itself, releasing your own body's enzymes to open your pores up, let the pressure come down naturally. And if it doesn't work, then yes, we have drops, we have other options, but let's do this first. This is how we take care of glaucoma in our practice. This is our standard of care in our practice. And I just tell them, like, straight up, that we have drops as an option, but only after SLT doesn't work. So if they're a good candidate anatomically, then I don't even really give them a choice, because not like we give them a choice which PGA versus beta block. We say, this is a PGA, so I'm doing for you. We don't give them that choice. So we're always telling them this is what you're going to have done. So I think we have to, for me personally, just feel like, okay, what's best for me? What would I do? To your point, John and Angela, and that's kind of how I would present it. But I think the whole beam of light. Now, if they ask me, is it a laser? I've heard it's a laser. I'm like, yeah, it's a laser, like a laser pointer. Laser pointers don't hurt you. They don't cut, right? Same idea. And so I kind of use those terminologies, but that's been helpful. The whole rejuvenation kind of vibe as well.
People talk about patients saying they're scared of a laser. I don't know that anybody's ever said that to me.
I've had a couple in my past, not a lot, but there's some. It depends on your comfort level and your age group. I think there's some people like, oh, I don't want a laser. I don't want a laser. I'll just do drops first. I've heard that in the past. Now with the beam of light and the rejuvenation, then I haven't had that issue.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever had a patient say that. I think that that's doctors presenting it in a scary way. They're almost sheepish about saying, I want to do a procedure instead of a drop. And the patients, my guess is the patients are not queuing on the word laser. They're queuing on the confidence of their doctor.
That I agree with. Oh my God, yes. I mean, think about premium IOLs. I mean, you're like the master, John, right? I mean, think about it. Right? If you're like, well, you could do this, it's going to cost you X amount of money, and you're like, oh, well, why would I do that again? Versus like, this is what's going to be based on what you want. This is what I think is best for you. I think it's going to be a good option, So I think you're absolutely right. The confidence level is a huge part.
And it's got to be earnest. You actually have to believe it.
Believe it. You have to believe it.
If you don't believe it, we've evolved as humans to sniff out unconfidence, right? It's a thin slicing move we have.
Yeah, no, totally agree. You got to be, and you got to practice that. It's a tough way to live, my friends, no doubt. All right, let's get to the polling, and then we'll get to what I did, and then kind of see what you guys' thoughts are. So the poll here looks. I'm going to look at both Instagram, I believe, and LinkedIn, I believe here. So we have on Instagram. So the next step most people felt was the SLT and or micropulse kind of laser, or those options as well. And then second was doing a MIGS. Third was Zen bleb type of thing. And the last one at this time was changed to a different PGA or drug delivery, which I thought was interesting, because I thought drug delivery would be a little higher in that. But I think most people felt SLT and then a MIGS procedure. Is that surprising for you guys that drug delivery is that low on this list? Not that right or wrong, but curious.
Yes. Because I think it's a more viable option. No, because it's relatively new. And so the other things have been around a little bit, and just overcoming the inertia of a new product in the marketplace.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that was the LinkedIn. I'm sorry. I think on Instagram, the difference was in Instagram. So LinkedIn had that. Instagram also said that SLT was kind of 50% patients said, yeah, doctors said yes, that was the next step. But then the second one was drug delivery. So in Instagram people, felt drug delivery was next. So I thought that was interesting. LinkedIn had a very different vibe than the Instagram folks.
Instagram's more progressive than LinkedIn.
I'm not saying it. I'm just saying there's a difference there. Thanks, John. But that was really interesting as well. The last one was doing a subcon surgery as well. So Miggs was third, and then Zen last. So let's get to another question here. Is the follow up is if you're going to do a Miggs, what type of Miggs would you do in this case? So conventional Miggs. Any thoughts, Jella and John, and then we'll get to the audience again.
Well, she's a pseudo fake, so that already eliminates one of the stent option, which would have been my, my choice if she was doing cataract surgery at the same time. That's a Hydra stent. But because she's already pseudo fake, and in this case, pseudo exfoliation, we assume that it's a diffuse trabecular dysfunction. I would prefer to do 360 canaloplasty plus maybe 180 degrees of goniotomy and leaving some room for future sustained delivery options such as iDose. So that's what I would do. I wouldn't choose canaloplasty or goniotomy. I will probably do both.
I would probably do iStent inject versus Omni. And I would add ECP to it. We published a study a while back that you get another millimeter of mercury too. I think that you have to inject steroid in the eye at the time you do it to keep the eye quiet. Thankfully, we've got easy options for that now. But and part of that is because I think that the iStent Infinite trial showed way better data in this exact patient population than we suspected that it would. And it did the trial for it. So we've got actual applicable data to these patients. I think that Omni is certainly reasonable too, and that's what we did before Infinite was available and the data out there. And then if we're fast forward a year, I bet I'm doing Infinite plus an iDose, and just belt and suspenders approach, especially if I know that prostaglandin worked for her. It's just that it doesn't work for her because she isn't getting it in or causing intolerance.
Yeah, I think this idea of combining, whether it's drug delivery and MIGS or MIGS in general, I think I'm a big fan of using both canaloplasty and, let's say, an iStent Infinite. I love Hydras too as well, but you're right. We can do it off label, of course, in this case too. But yeah, I think using a combined canaloplasty type of vibe and actually doing 3 iStents, I think is a good option, safe option, little destruction to the TM as well. But let's talk to the audience. I'll tell you what I did in this case.
When I was in training 15 years ago, goniotomy, trabecular meshwork just doesn't work in adults. That's the dogma. Okay. So then you come back and you say, wait a second, no, it does work. Look at all of this data. How did we think that it didn't work in the past? Then the dogma was, well, if you bypass the TM, it's dead. You can't ever go back there. And then again, the data doesn't show that. And so we need to continually challenge ourselves on what is our belief set right now that we're espousing that is wrong, and we should be challenging with actual data. And that's I'll quit preaching.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I was surprised. I was part of the Infinite trials, and we had these patients who were, pretty advanced in some ways and had previous trabs and, tubes, et cetera. And I thought there's no way. We were taught, yeah, you bypass that TM completely and you're gone. If fibrosis, it scars, it collapses, everything's gone. And then the next thing we have, it's 70% of patients getting 20% reduction of IOP and same or less meds. I'm like, what? And these MTMT patients in the Infinite trial were ridiculously beneficial. I mean, so if you never had a previous trab or tube, and you did 3 of those stents, pretty significant in reduction and target pressures down to low teens a lot of times on less meds. So definitely, I think you're absolutely right. Reestablishing flow is something I never thought we could do, and it kind of blew my mind after that data set. So thank you for that. And we have to keep it open mind. That's what glaucoma's taught me. It humbles you when you think you know what you're doing. You don't. It's very humbling. So let's share the audience polls responses for what conventional MIGS would you do in this patient here. So in the LinkedIn world, we found that most people were with Jella at the goniotomy kind of thing, goniotomy, maybe canaloplasty goniotomy combination. So 44% said goniotomy, 34% said stenting, like John was saying, and then 18% or 16% canaloplasty, and a few ECPs. So definitely, I think goniotomy was something that people thought because of pseudoexfoliation removed. We think that the TM is a main source of resistance in these pseudoexfoliation patients. So I think a lot of people felt let's just remove it. So whether it's a Omni, as a KDB, or whatever else, Scion, whatever you use, that was the idea behind, I think, the goniotomy for a lot of docs out there. And if you look at the Instagram post, we found that most people said stenting. So it's interesting. So more goniotomies in the link. This is really kind of cool. Talk about social awareness here of the different platforms. Instagram, there was a stenting first, then it was a tie between canaloplasty and goniotomy. So Tagella, maybe people thought a combination, a little canaloplasty, a little otomy at the same time, like you were saying. So interesting to see how there's a difference there. I think that there's no right or wrong answer. I think for me, what I did actually was a combination of, for this patient, of a drug delivery, Durista, and SLT first. I did both. I just did both because I figured I'm going to hedge my bets. So I said, all right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and do SLT first, see how much reduction we get, see if it works, just curious to see how much. And then prophylactically, around 6 to 8 weeks, I went ahead and put a Durista in there as well. So she's still doing pretty well, kind of the middle teen. She's around that 15, 16 range with that combination. And so we'll see what happens. But again, you always have that conventional pathway open there. I can go back in, do an iDose alone if I need to, if that's enough, or do an iDose with maybe canaloplasty or stenting later on as well. So yeah, I think that the idea is that we have these options, and it's not that you have to have one or the other. And I think it's just thinking about the long-term journey of this patient, say, okay, we have these other options later on. Keeping your options open, I think, is really important as well. John and Tagella, any thoughts on this case, or just any parting words for our audience about kind of what we talked about today?
Well, it hasn't been very long ago that we only had a filtering surgery options. That was only 10 years ago. And so now I think this is really the prime time to be a glaucoma specialist. We have so many, different gadgets and different options. And I think still a lot to be learned and a lot to be studied. The reason that we have so many options could also be because there's not a good one single option. So, all these are new devices and sustained delivery medications. It's exciting to have them, but I think we need to do more research to have more, long-term outcomes to see what will be the best options for each of the patient categories.
My parting words is that it's up to us. The burden's on our shoulders to help determine what's best for our patients. And so we've got a lot of options. We need to actually generate the data in high quality ways to help us make better decisions and move away from this place where we are, where a lot of people have different opinions. Great. That's the place where we're at. And then do the science to help make our patients understand it better. Thanks so much, Paul.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks, John. Thanks, Tagella. Thank you, everybody out there, for joining us here on this Survey Says episode. It's awesome to hear comments from you guys here and also from the audience and kind of share each other's thoughts. And I think that's what it's all about, really kind of learning from each other. So thank you. And hope you guys will stay tuned for another episode, hopefully coming your way in the future. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of GT the Podcast. If you have any feedback or topic suggestions, find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. And stay tuned for more hot topics in glaucoma care on GT the Podcast.